So my name is Kim Ruther. I am an X-ray tech and a farm wife and a mother of 4, now 3. I am from Northern Alberta, and I have been very fortunate to come and be a part of this group of lifesavers. So the reason I'm involved with anything heart related is because on May 22nd, 2012, I got home late from work and I was a total bag to my oldest son because he got a bad math mark. And so I braided him, and he had the first volleyball practice of the season scheduled that night. And so he left, and when he left, he said, "Are you sure you don't want to come along with me, Mom?" And I said, "No, Brock, and you better get that math mark up or it's going to be the last practice you ever go to." And then about half an hour later, one of the teachers called me from the school and said that he had collapsed and he wasn't breathing normally. And so I thought it was related to his ski boarding injury and that he maybe had fainted or something. And so I went into town, and when the ambulance came into the emergency department, I started taking pictures thinking that they were going to be great blackmail photos for his wedding and he was going to think this was really cool. And then the doctor came over and said, "I'm sorry, but we aren't going to be able to save your son." And I was just like, how does a 16-year-old boy just collapse and die on a gym floor? And so then I started doing research, and I discovered that he had had an abnormal ECG a year prior with the ambulance, with the drug and alcohol awareness program. And for some crazy reason, he was selected to be the kid that was hooked up to the ECG, and it was abnormal. And so ironically, the same teacher that performed breaths on him the night that he collapsed was at that awareness event. And when they said that his ECG was abnormal, she made them take the leads off his chest and then reattach them, and it was still really abnormal. So they just said, must be the equipment is faulty. So they sent him home with his little tracing, and he folded it up and put it in his secret box of treasures. And then we found it actually a year after he died, and found out that he had actually had an abnormal ECG a year before he had died. So, there's all these things that led up to the event, and it was very tough. So since Brock's death, I requested his 911 dispatch call and reviewed it over and over, and I could see that there was deficiencies in our system. So this wasn't about blame. Nobody did anything wrong. And well, except me as a mother, I think not because he had stood in our kitchen 2 weeks before he died complaining of chest pain, and I was like, "Oh, you're fine. Yeah, everybody has chest pain." But if he would have been 45 or 50 or 60, I would have hauled his ass to the hospital so fast, because that's what we do with people that are older. We get them checked out, but you never assume that with a kid it's cardiac arrest. So I think that after his death and after his reviewing the 911 call, I could see that there was detrimental breaks in our system right from the awareness. So in the schools, we should be training kids from kindergarten all the way up to play with AED trainers so that they know what they're like, they know how to use them, they know how to do compressions, they know how to do breaths, so that by the time they reach graduation, we have expertly performed BLS from our citizens, from our students, right from all the way through school, so that you have a citizenry or a society of trained responders, because sudden cardiac arrest is a huge issue, and our survival rates are frankly horrible. So if we could have our students and our bystanders trained, not just our paramedics and EMS people or our hospital staff, but all of our people trained, I think that is where we will see the biggest improvement in sudden cardiac arrest survival rates. So I think that the biggest area of improvement right now is being focused on some of the professionals, whereas I think that schools, it's schools, getting into schools and having our kids really focused on and trained is going to be huge. Because Brock was surrounded by a whole group of grade 10 boys who were strong and could have done great CPR. And there was an AED right at the gym doors. And so he didn't get CPR for 5 minutes, and then he never got a shock until 13 minutes after. So you go from this boy who had like a 95% chance of survival to 0 in 10 minutes. And I think that's where we're failing. Like schools, it's hard because they always have rotating staff, and they always have other priorities that come to the forefront. So his school did a lot of changes around getting more training. But I think instead of just training teachers and coaches, we're missing our opportunity with training other kids. So there should be medical emergency kits in every school that have AED, EpiPens, tourniquets, so that when you have critical injuries at a school, you have a kit that people can just run and have drills so that they know exactly what to do. And not just the teachers, but also the students, so that you have that awareness built over years of practice. Yeah, so there has been successes. So after Brock died, I sent a letter to the International Academies of Emergency Dispatch, along with some help from the Alberta Health Services EMS team, and they reviewed his call and put in changes and amendments to the dispatch protocol. So after Brock's death, they initiated Brock's Law with the dispatch protocol, so that recognition of AEDs and rapid response, and then they check back routinely to see if an AED is available, so that they can have responders use the available AED right away, and also to recognize the agonal respirations, which is super important, so that you get a faster response and they start the BLS process quicker to save those lives. I think that what we need to be looking at is heart screening. I think that prevention of these arrests before they ever happen is going to be key. Having communities get on board with public health nurses or different organizations who are interested in doing screening is huge. And I think initiating the conversation around getting schools to adopt medical emergency drills and more CPR, BLS training for kids is huge. Having your community aware of the incidence of cardiac arrest, because there's a lot of people that don't understand the numbers that are involved with cardiac arrest and how prevalent that is in our societies, and the huge impact, like the survival rates they double or triple with use of BLS and AEDs. So if we could impact our communities through that awareness, I think that's where we're going to see the most change. Oh, where do I start? So, oh boy, there are so many changes that need to come. I think that some of the biggest things that need to change is our citizenry is terrified of using AEDs. There's been so many myths around use of AEDs injuring people. And so one of the things that I do is I go into schools, I put the actual pads on my chest and I press the shock button and show people that there is absolutely nothing scary about an AED, and it'll only shock if you need the shock. And I think that going in and having kids, like the kids will come and they'll put the pads on my chest, and having teachers, kids, everybody really get involved with that and take the fear away from the response, and making a transparent and blame-free, failure-free society, so that we're not blaming people if somebody dies, so that we can talk openly about mistakes that were made. Because it's only through really taking the fear of failure and that blame out of the picture that we can look openly at death events and say, you know what, we tried the best we could with what we knew at the time, And now that we know better, we can do better. I think one of the questions that we're not asking is how do we marry the education silo and the health silo? How do we build that into a seamless team of educators and health providers so that we can have both together moving forward in ways to save lives? So we have money going to education, we have money going into health, but we don't really have the health and education people working together as a team to say, okay, how are we going to make this a really proactive group to make change and save these young lives? Because we're losing way too many of our kids to cardiac arrest events that are totally preventable and could have really positive outcomes instead of tragedies.